Morning. My name is Gigi. My message to the African leaders: African countries, no African countries can succeed alone. Africa need each other to succeed. If you want to have a natural gas, you can take to use in development of industrial sectors. This is what we need now in build the economy. Industrial sectors is a major route in build the economy. Good morning.
Now, imagine being awarded $6.6 billion for not sticking a spade in the ground. Well, on the receiving end of that ruling back in 2017 was Nigeria. That award to a British Virgin Island registered company has ballooned to almost $10 billion when you add in all the interest. Well, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari accused the company of attempting to cheat Nigeria out of billions of dollars. Back in 2010, two Irish businessmen agreed to set up a gas power plant, but Nigeria never built the pipeline to the plant. Well, the company, Process and Industrial Development, has denied any wrongdoing, and Nigeria is challenging the award in the British High Court right now. The case has drawn a great deal of interest from advocacy groups that claim investors can extract billions even from failed investments. So let's talk to Kawar Qureshi, QC, head of McNair Chambers. He joins us via Skype from London. Kawar, so why did this award go against Nigeria? I mean, it seems unfair, given that the Irish company didn't even put a spade in the ground, but they claim to have spent $40 million just on design.
So far as this particular case is concerned, from what I can glean, there are public documents, including a judgment of the High Court. The claimant's position is very simply this: a contract was entered into in 2010, as you've just summarized. It was breached by Nigeria in 2012. There was a protracted arbitration process, which led to a finding of liability against Nigeria, that they'd breached the contract. And then subsequently, it's being suggested that Nigeria didn't do enough to contest the next phase, which is the damages phase, leading to that substantial award that you've just mentioned. And I ought to add that in my 30 years of experience in practice as a barrister, I've acted for or against nearly 60 states on commercial arbitration matters, and such sums are not unusual. They're substantial, but I'm afraid awards against states of hundreds of millions of dollars are not uncommon.
Under the circumstances, Kawar, could the court set aside the award or even overturn it?
Arbitration is a process that's been agreed to very often by states in commercial contracts, and the assumption, quite often the wrong assumption, is that the state has undertaken effective due diligence, legal review and due diligence, commercial due diligence of the counterparty. That seems not to be often the case. However, when it comes to the award of the arbitrators, the perceived virtue of arbitration is that it's not like a court process. Arbitral awards, thanks to a convention of 1958, are subject to very limited grounds of challenge when they're taken to states for enforcement. And the ground that I understand that Nigeria is invoking before the English courts is known as public policy. They're suggesting that the contract was tainted by fraud and corruption. To establish that, they would need fairly strong evidence for the English court to conclude that that was in fact the case. If they were able to establish that, then the English court would not countenance enforcement.
And could the company seek to perhaps seize assets in the United States? How would that work, for instance?
Ordinarily, once an arbitral award has been issued, there is a limited period of time for that award to be challenged. In this case, Nigeria sought to challenge out of time and sought to deploy evidence that they contended wasn't available during the arbitral process. However, there's nothing to stop the beneficiary of an arbitral award, the claimant, from seeking to enforce the award wherever Nigeria has commercial assets. So they could go against the physical assets, property owned by the state of Nigeria, proceeds of sale of oil, ships, aircraft, anything that they could lay their hands on which isn't encumbered. Theoretically, of course, that could include assets in the United States of America and indeed anywhere else.
So, Kawar, let me ask you, I mean, why do investors choose arbitration in London or New York? And is that fair to developing nations?
Ultimately, as I mentioned to you at the outset, it's open to a state to try and negotiate a contract with the foreign investor. And there are some states, because of their bargaining power, maybe because of their level of sophistication, that insist that if there's going to be a dispute, it must be before the local courts. But generally, commercial investors take the view, rightly or wrongly, that the local courts are unlikely to find against the state or an emanation of the state, that the process before the local courts may be lengthy, uncertain. Arbitration has the virtue of providing an award that's enforceable with very limited options available to the defendant. And London, New York have both been chosen because historically they've been seen as having not just stable, strong financial centers, but a good legal pool. It's easy to come and go from there. And the courts, certainly in England, have for decades signaled their support for the arbitration process as opposed to adopting a position of intervention, which unfortunately is seen to be the case in some jurisdictions, which are therefore unlikely to attract arbitration.
And Kawar, there's a growing trend in trade negotiations for nations to agree to pay the full value of a contract to corporations if a deal goes sour. Is that a fair practice, do you think?
Ultimately, it's for the state to determine what it is prepared to agree to. And the optimum position for a state is to take proper advice, commercial advice, legal advice, and once they've taken that advice, to form a view as to whether the contract is sustainable. The foreign investors' position, having acted for lots of foreign investors, having acted for states, the foreign investors' position is understandable. I've been invited in. I have spent money, however much it may be. I have a commercial expectation, a legitimate expectation that the state's undermined. And therefore, I'm entitled to pursue a claim to finality and seek an award. I have to say, though, that in addition to arbitration, there is a framework which provides protection to investors through what are known as bilateral investment treaties, state to state. And some states have now started to denounce those treaties, particularly in South America, as well as renegotiate them, because they're taking the view that these are one-sided.
Kawar, just a final brief thought to you. I mean, people will look at other cases which have been dragged through the courts, for example, vulture funds in Argentina. There is a perception that investors aren't willing to take big losses, and there's always a get-out clause that sees them walking off with huge payments.
Even if there were such a perception, and even if it was well-founded, I come back to the main point that I raised at the outset. Investors are entering into jurisdictions or entering into contracts, and it's incumbent upon states to ensure that their interests are properly protected. So they take proper legal advice, they undertake due diligence. Often that doesn't happen. Now, the reasons why we can speculate, but if there's a problem, that may well be one of the major areas that states need to address.
Kawar Qureshi, great to get your thoughts. Thank you very much indeed for talking to Counting the Cost. Thank you.
Thank you.